Cool new orc detachments and stratagems have been spoiled, but what does it all mean? Well, you've come to the right place. Hello and welcome to Incursion Tactics. My name's Luke, and this week I will be mostly talking about orcs. We have some shiny new rules and strats that have been spoiled on the Warhammer Community website. I'm going to break down what we've seen so far so that by the end of this video you're going to have a really strong idea about what's good and what's not about what's been spoiled so far. Here we see the contents page. There's a few key things we can get from this. And before we start to do that, I just want to caveat this straight away with, I'm not going to be speculating too much and thinking, oh, this could mean that or that could mean this, because I want to keep this focused on what we can actually see, what this actually means for the faction, and what things you can be expecting from this faction if this isn't an army that you play, but you just want to know what are some interesting things that are going to be on the horizon. And so let me tell you, from the get-go, we have a massive amount of variety, which is really, really nice to see. It looks like if you want to make a themed army that you're going to get a bonus for doing so, which is another little extra benefit. Even if you're playing a detachment that's not as strong as another detachment, at least you're getting some sort of bonus playing that certain strategy, which is really, really nice. Even if you might not be on par with something else, at least you're being rewarded in some way. So we've got Warhorde. My guess is that this is going to be the exploding sixes one, the basic sort of all sixes to hit will generate an extra hit like the army operates now. If that army rule isn't just factored in across all orcs all the time, that will be the ability that we see there. Next one down from that is Big Hunt, which is going to be beast snaggers. Then you got Cult of Speed for your buggies, your bikes, Dread Mob for your big mechanical things like Death Dreads, Stompers, Gorkanauts, Green Tide, just the normal men, Bully Boys, all the knobs, Mega Knobs, that sort of thing. They're going to be the flavours of all of those detachments, and then what we see within each of those is going to be interesting as it unfolds, and I'll get into what we've got spoiled so far in a moment. Before we get into the next page, the final thing that's really obvious from this to anyone who's played orcs at least is that a couple of key characters have gone, Badrock being the biggest one, and really and truly I'm not going to dwell on this too much. Yeah, it's not great losing characters, losing units. If you want to play narrative games or you want to play, Legends games, then it's something that's generally good etiquette to pick up with your opponent beforehand, and you can still do that, so no one's stopping you from doing that if that's how you want to play, in which case this hasn't really changed an awful lot, assuming they appear in Legends. As I say, I'm not focusing too much on the negative part of this here. Yes, it's frustrating, but the best thing to do is move on. Focus on the positives, things that we've got control over, which is this awesome new codex, and there'll be lots of interesting things to look at, unpack, and play with as the new book comes out, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And so, moving on to the main event, the man himself, Ghazghkull Thraka, entry number 1 for the datasheets. Not an awful lot has changed, and this isn't really surprising in terms of the raw stat. This is a pattern that's been the case for pretty much all of the codexes that have been released. We can see here from what he was before to what he is now, generally the same, with just a couple of really important key upgrades. And the first one, which is the biggest and most impactful one, in my opinion, is the sweep attack on Gork's Claw. Before, you had a very real chance of getting into combat with something, fluffing a couple of hits, fluffing a couple of wounds, rolling those ones, and then only killing like 1 or 2 models in the unit that you're in combat with, and that could be really devastating because it just holds Ghazghkull up, doesn't kill a unit, they can then fall back, score some points, and then you just get shot up. So Gork's Claw helps to mitigate that. If you're up against the chaff unit, say a unit of 10 guardsmen or a unit of space marines, the sweep attack makes it so that he is very, very likely just to punch through that unit on his own, no worries. And that's really, really nice because that means he can then be free to move about however you want him to do, rather than just kind of hitting a bit of a brick wall, as can sometimes happen when you've got only a handful of attacks. And this brings him in line with a lot of the other centerpiece epic hero models that we see across the game with a boatload of attacks. Really, really important change for Ghazghkull, and one that's very, very needed, and one that I wouldn't overlook if you're thinking about using him. Obviously, potential points changes and adjustments notwithstanding, as I said, I'm not going to speculate on any changes to points, but assuming things stay exactly the same points wise, this is a strict upgrade. So maybe he's going to get a little bit of a points increase to reflect this change. I hope not, but either way, it certainly makes him more usable on the tabletop, depending on how expensive he now becomes. The other big change is the slight upgrade to Prophet of the Great War. And that is the +1 to hit, +1 to wounds still applies, which is really, really good. It's been upgraded with the Unbridled Carnage thrown into it as well, which is the critical hits on a 5+ stratagem. So he gives that as an effect whilst leading a unit, assuming a war has been called. So this could be really, really interesting depending on what else is going on with the unit he's leading as well. So a nice little upgrade for Ghazghkull, and something that is going to be potentially increasing the amount of damage he is dishing out, which is the main reason we include a unit like this in our armies. So a welcome addition for Ghazghkull. And lastly, the War banner remains exactly as it did before, giving lethal hits on the War turn, which is again a really useful way of increasing damage output on such a key damage dealing unit. Much like Ghazghkull was before, he's going to be a nice centerpiece for an Orc army. The eye of the storm of destruction, the green tide encroaching upon your opponents. 12-inch aura effect of lethal hits is really, really nice, getting things like Catans off the table, greater demons, big armor, that sort of thing. So we can really start to stack up the damage and punch through some stuff that we would normally struggle to get through, and so it's going to be very deserving of an inclusion in Orc armies going forward, no doubt. And now we go on to some of the detachments that have been spoiled. First up we have Dreadmob with the try that button special rule. So each time a mech, Orc walker or grot vehicle unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, roll a dice at the end of the phase. Weapons equipped by models in that unit have one of the following 3 effects that you can see on the screen. So all of these are going to be good in different situations, but if we're not wanting to rely on the randomness, we can choose the effect instead, and that gives us the hazardous ability on our weapons, which is obviously bad but incredibly orky. If we've already got that hazardous ability, instead of it blowing up on a 1, it's a 1 or a 2. So this is really, really cool because it gives you the agency back in a unit. What I really appreciate with a rule like this is you haven't just got a forced random effect in place. If it was just a d6, it would be truly awful and bottom of the barrel detachment rule, because if it's random, you're going to get sustained hits when you really need lethal, you're going to get AP when you really need lethal. It's just really, really frustrating, like firing at a greater demon and you get AP2. Wow, yeah, thank you, random detachment ability rule. At that point, it's like you don't have a rule. So I really, really appreciate the fact that they've taken out a feel bad. So then you have the option of, okay, I've got an effect here that I could try and force, but there's a payoff here and there's a risk involved. So you then have at every juncture a choice to make, which is really, really cool and makes for some really engaging tactical decisions. Or if you've just loaded up with hazardous guns and you're going full orc mode, you just go wah and pull the trigger. Maybe you'll blow up, but that orc's living his best life and you get to have both ends of the spectrum of fun there, which is really, really good. It's a much better way of approaching these orky style rules, which is really, really cool. So you've got tactical decisions and you've got random orky fun. So this is an excellent special rule for this detachment. One that gives you really good, solid, tangible benefits, but is also really bang on flavor hit as well. One takeaway from me for this is every time a unit fires, so if you've got multiple different units across your army that are in this Dreadmob and they're firing at different targets, you can pick and choose what ability you get depending on what you're shooting at, which is fantastic. It's a really nice little buff because you're not always going to want the same thing. Compare this to like the Tyrannid rule where they can adapt to whatever the army might be. You might be playing against a mixture of units, and so one unit wants lethal hits 1 point and then another unit on the other side of the board wants AP2, and the fact that you can do that is really, really nice. And I'm saying when it fires, this isn't just limited to the shooting phase, it's shooting and fighting. So this is an amazing detachment ability and one that really does truly reward you for playing all of the Dreadmob stuff, which is not only a lot of fun, but it opens up a lot of tactical flexibility in the codex as well. It's going to be quite deep and hopefully quite engaging. If they're all as good as this, if not better, then there's going to be multiple different valid ways to play this codex, which is fantastic. So I'm loving this. This is a home run detachment rule, and I can't wait to see what the new codex brings out for the Dreadmob. Hopefully the Stomper goes down a few points. Bigger shells for bigger gits is the Dreadmob battle tactic strat. So you use this in your shooting phase when a mech, orc walker or grot vehicle from your army gets to shoot. Each time you use it, you can choose to push it. Until the end of that phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack that targets a monster or a vehicle, add 1 to the wound roll, and then you add 1 to the damage characteristic, and you get hazardous as well. And obviously the hazardous that you give yourself from using this stratagem stacks with other forms of hazardous as per your army ability. You could then have hazardous rolls on a 1 or a 2. This is a really interesting stratagem. +1 to wound and +1 damage is never not good, and this is really, really powerful when it matters. For 1 CP, it's a nice way just to get a nice additional amount of damage, like a subtle little extra. So say you've got a couple of walkers shooting, firing some rockets, and you've got a couple of wounds that you need to plink off a transport or a monster that's just sat there. You really want that last bit of shooting to do the job. This is something you can pop just to really make sure that it does that, and that's really, really cool. Orc shooting in general doesn't tend to be good. If this was a stratagem we could use in combat, if they'd changed the flavour of it to not be bigger shells, bigger crumping for bigger gits, it could apply in the shooting phase and the fight phase, then I'd have a lot more time for this because then you could really get some mileage out of it. I'd even accept if it gave you hazardous on your close combat attacks as well. If you're really just pushing the can to its limits as it's trying to chop and crump up stuff, that would be really cool. But because it's limited to only the shooting phase, things like killer cans it might be quite good on. If you've got lots of killer cans, like a big unit of killer cans benefits benefiting from this, firing lots and lots of shots. That could be really quite powerful, but again, it pushes you into one direction with your list. So it's really, really good if you've gone in that direction, I guess, but it's not going to be that widely applicable, I wouldn't have thought. And whilst the 1 CP cost is appealing, I think the way that you'd have to write a list to have big units to get the benefit out of it could be itself a bit of a trap. And currently the way Gorkonauts are, they're not that strong, not that good in the game. So is this really something that's going to be paying off for some of your big vehicles? That remains to be seen. That's the missing piece of the puzzle as to whether I think this is a really class strat, or it's a bit kind of niche and a little bit okay, but only if you've got, you know, big units of killer cans, for example. So one to watch for sure. It's got a bit of potential there, but it depends on how aggressively costed the big units are that you can get on this, or how effective the shooting is on the units that are going to be able to make the most of this. Next up is mob mentality. I'm going to break down a bit more detail of this in the members video that I've got this week. If you're considering becoming a member, then it's $2.99 a month and you get access to additional videos every week, and the focus of that video is going to be going a bit of a deeper dive into the mob mentality detachment rule, as well as the stratagems and the enhancement that's been spoiled on Warhammer Community as well. So if you're liking the videos that I'm producing and you want to see more, then check out the membership offering and consider joining, show your support and get access to even more content. In addition to becoming a member, if you want to support, I've also put some Amazon affiliate links. So if you're thinking about buying some miniatures, then please do consider doing so through there, as that is a fantastic and easy way to support the channel if you were already planning on making a purchase. But what I will say, rounding out this video with the mob mentality, is this is a particularly cool ability. It's not only very powerful, but it also showcases a point I made earlier around variety. This is something that is vastly different to the previous detachment that we saw before, and rewards you for going in a completely different direction. You got 5+ invulnerable save, which normally you'd only get when you have your war turns. You're getting this all the time on all of your boys units, and then you get reroll 1s if when they're targeted they have 10 or more models in that unit. So if you had a Lehman Russ firing lots of different guns at that one unit and they had 20 models in there at the start of when it was targeted, as it works through all the different guns it's firing, if you then suddenly get orcs dying and you got less than 10 models in that unit now, you're still going to get the reroll 1s, because when it was targeted for that shot it had 10 or more models. It's the way that looks like it's written, like how you would work out how many extra shots you get for blasts. It appears to work in the same way and is another plus point in its favour. One of the reasons why this detachment rule is particularly strong is because of inbuilt resilience. If you take a horde army, then you want ways of keeping them alive as much as you can. So things like this are fantastic, offer you some excellent resilience, and a 5+ save, if anyone's played demons, is a 5+ invulnerable save, I should say, is particularly good, because you can just get turns where you spike it and boys just don't die. Couple this with feel no pain saves from the pain boys, then you could be having some very resilient units. Invariably, if previous things are to go by, then the pain boys probably won't make the cut, but it is an option if you want to go down the more resilient route. But one thing is going to be clear in the face of the oncoming green tide, and that is going to be the importance of close combat and how to get the most out of the fight phase. And I've made some videos on this topic which can help you to get the most out of these phases and understand some really strong tactics and things to defend against, and also add to your own arsenal when we're getting into the cut and thrust of close combat. Keep rolling those dice. Thanks very much for watching, and stay tuned for more.